So I am at Northern Seminary in Chicago with Dave Fitch, and Dave is professor of theology here, and really he is one of the creative, fun leaders of lots of conversations across North America in this question of missional theology and on the ground what God's up to. And he recently published a new book, David,
Yes.
Faithful Presence. Tell us a little bit about what the book is about.
Well, I can summarize it in 3 P's. It's about presence, how God is at work in the world through his presence. That presence is the way God works in the world. So we must learn how to discern his presence. And that takes practices. The second P. This is the way I summarize it.
That's great. I love it.
I love
already.
P's. I just do P's. 3 P's in this case. Practices. So historically, the church has gathered around practices. You might say the Roman Catholics kind of put them into this nice package of 7 sacraments. And so I want to talk about how the Eucharist trains us to be present in the world around tables, reconciliation, proclaiming gospel. Practices. It's really important to understand that to discern the presence of Christ in the world, we need to practice being together in the world in certain ways where Christ promises to be present. And then lastly, what's the third P? Oh, places.
Yeah.
I've done a study in this book. I'm not the first one to do it. Andy McGowan at Yale, the church historian, located 3 circles or 3 places that the church lives as a way of life. This close circle is the gathering and worship. This dotted circle is this gathering of Christians in the neighborhood, discerning and discipling and living a way of life via these practices. And then lastly, in this, what I call the half circle, or the guest space in the various places where we live, where God is present through Jesus Christ. But the question is, will he be recognized there? And we come and be present to help point, Jesus is present in what I just saw, and call people into his presence and into his kingdom. So yeah, that's the idea behind the book, Faithful Presence.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now I know you're.
Do you mind if I take
you
a
keep
swig
going.
of
Keep
McDonald's
going.
coffee?
Just turn it around so people don't see McDonald's coffee. That's all. You are. I know that so much of your work and your writing comes out of deep engagement with the tradition, and it comes out of grounded engagement and experience.
Yes.
So, tell me a little bit about this faithful presence for you and for your family in the neighborhood where you live. Because I know we're sitting in the school here, and you don't live very far away.
Right.
And you do church.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about
Well,
that.
in fact, Rayanne and I and Max moved to Westmont, which is about, 6 miles from here.
Yeah.
And it's a middle to lower middle class, wonderful place, neighborhood. And our earlier church plant, Life of the Vine, sent about 20 adults. There's now maybe 40 adults, got a lot of kids, 30 kids. And we all decided to live within, I'd say, walking distance, 5, 6, 7 blocks from each other. And we meet in the center of town on the close circle that I described.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just working out what it means to live kingdom as a way of life. And I could, let me see if I can, how could I highlight, can you ask me like 2 specific questions about what it, because it really does shape how I write, think, develop theologically, that space. In fact, I try very hard, it's not working out in October, but almost every other month for the next 2 years, I'm not leaving town more than once a month overnight, because that place and the engagement with the local community feeds my life and my theology and everything.
And what's been happening as you've stepped into that community? The people that you're bumping into, how that presence gets worked out.
Okay, well, I'll give you an example. I became known for hanging out at a McDonald's. It was one of the most wonderful McDonald's.
This is the hardest part of this interview.
I know that you, my Canadian brothers, despise McDonald's for good reasons in some respects, but the coffee there is not up to your standards. I understand that. I don't have very high standards, so the coffee's really good for me and it's cheap. But when I moved to Westmont, I had to find my space, my half circle. I had to locate where I was going to be and where I was going to join with other church people to be present and engage. I think I went to 3 bars. I started out at this one bar. I don't want to say the names over tape just in case people might be dissuaded from going to these great places. But one of these bars was a sports bar, and the people were too good looking for me, frankly. I mean, if you can see what I'm saying.
I got
I'm
you.
not the snazziest guy.
I got you.
Another bar, there are too many people trying to pick up people in this bar. But I found a bar finally after like 8 months where it's just a great place to be. A lot of hurting people. I felt very welcomed. And I started hanging out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to teach people how to pray the epiclesis when you're in these spaces. The epiclesis is that old Latin word for invoking the presence of the Spirit,
Right.
tending to what he's doing here at the table. But I'm at a bar, and I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at these gentlemen with that look in their eyes. I was there with a friend recently. I do all my meetings in this bar now, on either Wednesday nights or Thursday nights. And by the way, the beer, which Christian Missional Alliance people in the States can now drink a beer if you discern the beer, and I'm definitely discerning the beer in these bars because I believe discernment means I'm discerning the presence of Christ. So anyways, I digress. But I'm looking at these men, some of them Vietnam War veterans. That's kind of an older man's bar. And I'm just saying, in their eyes, they're longing for Eucharist. They're longing to be known, loved, know the presence, the healing presence that comes in that space where God's at work. And so that's it's Potbelly Bar in downtown Westmont. It's a great space. And it took me a long time. I think you have to find the right space that's part of your everyday life. Don't make this space a project. Don't make this group of people a project. Instead, enter their place as guests and make it part of your everyday life so that you're there just to be there.
Yeah, that's what I was picking up, is that faithful presence is not a church project.
It's not.
It's not, 2 years ago we were doing missional. The year before that we were doing something else. Now we're going to go into bars and that. This is something completely different than that.
Right. The worst thing that happened to, and I know you agree with me on this, Al, the worst thing that ever happened to missional church is it became traditional church with a few justice projects added on.
Yeah.
And that exhausts people. But it also feeds into this need to be relevant and or feel good about myself. In fact, so basically it feeds into all the instincts that work against mission.
Right.
Instead, let's train people, let's lead people to be present out of their everyday lives in the spaces they already inhabit. Get out of your homes, get out of the 4 walls of a church building, and be there. I just heard Stanley Hauerwas here at the seminary last week, and he said that in Luke chapter 10, Jesus sent out people in twos. He says the gospel needs to be witnessed in groups of at least 2 because the gospel needs to be seen. So what goes on between 2 people is the gospel. 2 Christians,
right,
before a bunch of other people. How we live, how we reconcile, how we talk to one another, how we care for one another, how we tend to one another, how we share goods. I know it's a stretch to say between 2 people there can be an economy, but how we live socioeconomically can be witnessed so that people can see the gospel and say, hey, I think I want that. Too often the gospel becomes abstracted as a concept separate from a local way of life, and it becomes something we use as a war tool against somebody else to say, I'm right and you're wrong, and at that point we've lost the gospel.
That's especially true here in North America. So I want to take what you said about your own location and shift it a little bit to another question, but we're going to sort of say, let's stop it here and pick it up again in a moment around really a question about place
Yes.
and its importance.